A year before the Iraq War started, Mennonite Central Committee sent a delegation to Iraq, taking candles made by Dick Lehman. As a part of this effort, U.S. churches were also given candles to pray for Iraq. We continue to light our oil lamp every Sunday as we remember Iraq and places that need peace in the world. Now let's say the Lord's Prayer. Creator of our body and spirits, be honored in this time. May compassion rule our hearts. May our leaders follow your impulse as though they were led by love. Meet our needs, physical, social, and spiritual. Help us be patient with those who are impatient with us, for you exemplify that patience. No matter how tempting it is to act with impetuous self-serving, let us always consider the greater good above our impulse. Now let's do the opening worship. Sometimes, as we feel lonely, from the depths we cry to you, and within us a voice answers, and we know you are near us. Sometimes our daily life oppresses us. We lift our souls to you and realize we are serving you, divine love, and we see our life is sacred and good.
So now's a good time if you want to go ahead and you can pause this video, go down on the list, and then you could do the hymns. The hymns are they're just below me. They're right down there, and so there's three of them. And this time, I'm sorry, we didn't have Galen and the quartet do it. We couldn't organize it this week, but Galen promises that we'll get it going by next week. We'll have some more EMC singing. This time we have guest singers. All right, so you're done with the hymns now? Okay, good. All right, so this is Jerry. He's coming up.
He's gotten a lot smaller since he last saw him.
He is smaller. He's smaller. And so he's going to do the scripture reading. Jerry's doing the scripture reading.
Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 1 and 3, 1 through 3, and verses 10 and 11. I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good, but that also proved to be
Thank you, Jerry. It was very nice. So Jerry, after he had finished, Jerry realized that he didn't read verses 1 through 3 and then skipped down and did 10 and 11. He read all verses from verse 1 through verse 11, which is why that was kind of long, but we got the whole thing there, so that works out. All right, so what are we doing here? There we go. All right, so our story is about a caterpillar. Caterpillar who is at the bottom of the heap. And okay, maybe she ate a lot, and everyone was trying to get her to diet, just saying, well, you're eating too much. And some called her disgusting and ugly. It was bad. And she had no idea why they treated her that way. It just seemed unfair. I mean, ladybugs weren't treated that way. Ants weren't treated that way. But she was always disrespected. So she kept to herself and she hid away. And she created a room where she didn't need to be with anybody. And she isolated herself. Eventually, she felt, okay, well, I've been here enough time and I'm getting kind of lonely, so I guess I'll go out. So she left her room, and the whole world was different. No one treated her with disrespect. It was as if she saw them from a completely different standpoint. And she was freer than she had ever been before. Okay, so I just want to tell you that the pandemic right now is actually a portal. Some people think it's a punishment, and some people think it's a horrible incident, but it's actually a portal. The pandemic is a portal. We are right now, we are in a cocoon, and when we emerge, life will not be the same. There'll be different kinds of opportunities. There'll be many things that we were used to that won't be available anymore. But the most important thing that will change, the thing that actually makes the world different, is that we are going to be different. We will see the world differently. We will have a different kind of clarity that we had never had before. We will have freedoms that we never appreciated in our previous life. We will be different people. Now, the pandemic isn't actually the only kind of portal. There's lots of portals. Lots of things like this go on. Many of us have gone through changes. A bit more than a year ago, my family moved from Portland to Eugene, and we're seeing things a little differently now. We're certainly living different lives now. Some of us folks have retired recently. Some of us a little bit more than recently. And then there's some of us that have obtained a doctorate. Okay, one person in particular has obtained a doctorate recently. But all of us are living lives that we didn't think that we'd be living right now. Not any of us, I think, were expecting that we would just stay at home all the time. And some folks were planning on doing traveling, and that's not happening. And some of us were going to live our normal lives, but none of us are living our normal lives. None of us are able to do that. All of these changes us. It makes us new people with different perspectives, and our world changes around us because we see things differently. As we change and our circumstances change, then it feels to us that the whole world is changing. When we go through changes that will change the world, that it's good for us to ask questions about what kind of people we want to be and what kind of world do we want to live in. There's a lot of questions that we could ask ourselves, and one question that somebody brought to me was, what is the focus of our lives? What is really important? Well, I can't actually give an answer to you about what is important for your life, but we can do some reflections so we can think about it maybe and decide, okay, well, maybe these are things we need to think about in order for us to decide what is important in our lives. So we're going to do some reflections about approaches that can make our life better. Okay, so first, a big picture. What is life about? What do we want out of life? What is the best thing to drive us forward? Big question. So for a lot of people, like when you ask a parent, okay, well, what do you want for your kids? Well, I just want my kids to be happy. And the kids grow up and say, well, we just want to be happy. You know, we want our lives to be happy. And that's fine. Although every time that I hear someone say that happiness is the most important thing in their lives, I'm thinking that what they actually mean is bliss or giddiness or something, as if they just want to watch comedies all the time. And bliss is fine, and it's not a problem. But I think we all recognize that bliss is fleeting. It doesn't have. We don't get bliss all the time. We can't depend on it. Just like, you know, I can't depend on my kid when I give them a credit card. Oh, sorry. Never mind. So I think that actually.
You mean you?
Hang on. I think that that most people, when they think of a, quote, happy life, then they're thinking of a life that has a basis in pleasure, that you get to do things that you want to do, and a minimum of suffering or a minimum of pain. That's actually the basic philosophy of the ancient Greek Epicurus. Epicurus, that's actually the basic ethic of Epicurean philosophy. Epicurus didn't necessarily want tiny little cakes and nice little shots of alcohol. That wasn't what he was about. He was actually about this whole general idea of living a balanced life in which a person is able to obtain that which they desire and able to minimize that which brings pain or suffering. And that's actually also the basis of utilitarian philosophy, which has a whole idea that we want to increase the amount of pleasure, reduce the amount of suffering overall in the whole world. That we increase everyone's pleasure and decrease everyone's suffering, and that is what makes for a good world. But is the life of increasing pleasure and decreasing pain, is that actually the life that we want? So let me just ask you this. Suppose that a scientist came to you and said, yes, I am going to give you the perfect life. We know how to do this. Us science people have figured it out, and we are going to give you the perfect life. All you have to do is get into this vat of warm water. We will put you in this vat of warm water. We will plug you with tubes and electrodes and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to wire you up so that way all of your needs are met. And in this vat, you are just going to have visions and dreams of living the great life. You will live a life in which there will be no more suffering. You won't have to suffer anymore. You won't have to do anything unpleasant or irritating. And you can sing, and you will have the best voice. And it'll never crack or lose or miss its pitch. You could read the best books, and those books will never be boring. And you can speak to people, and not only will they always listen to you, but they'll also always agree with you. It'll be the perfect life. But is sitting in a vat, having visions of the perfect life, is that actually the life that we want? Is that what we're actually looking for? And what kind of life does that create for the world? I mean, what kind of world does that make? And it's always smooth roads, never rough roads. You're always able, you're never unable. Is that actually what you want? Is that actually what we want? Do we want everything to kind of go our way? Is that going to be the best life? Now, this isn't the only idea of happiness, the idea of increasing pleasure and decreasing suffering. That's not the only idea out there. There are other ideas of happiness. I'm actually interested if anybody has an idea. Well, I like happiness, but that isn't the way that I think of it. And I'd be really interested to hear what somebody else has to say about that. But I would posit that at least this idea, the idea of the smooth life where things go and a life without suffering, or at least even minimizing suffering, that's not the one that we want. That's not what we're seeking, and that's not even what any of us are really interested in. I take it back. I know of a few people that is exactly the life that they want. That's exactly what they want. But most of us, that actually isn't what we want. So, for instance, if we want to do well, if we want to go out for a sport, we know that participating in a sport is meaningless unless we suffer to become at least adequate at the sport. Suffering is a part of that process. If we're going to ride a bike, learn how to ride a bike, there's probably going to be at least one skinned knee in that process. If we have a job and we want to get that job we really like, in order to get that job, first we have to have our first job. And our first job is almost never the one that we want, and usually is a lot of suffering in that first job before we can get the job that we're actually going to be satisfied with. If we want a good relationship, we're going to have to apologize sometimes. Apologizing sucks. I don't like it. But it has to happen sometimes, even if it's really uncomfortable for us. The fact is that we gladly dive into a pool of suffering as long as the outcome is worth it. And even so, when we choose to participate in some suffering, the outcome is only kind of what we would call pleasure. It's kind of a strange thing. We're strange people. We go ahead and we take on suffering. Sometimes we take on suffering for its own sake. It's a strange thing. What is it that we're seeking? We're not actually seeking happiness per se. Instead, I would say that what we're actually seeking is that we want our lives to have meaning. We want our lives to be significant in some way. And even if it's not, and for some people, it's a life that may not be significant for themselves, but significant for someone else. In order for our lives to have meaning or importance, then we have to accept suffering. Because even if we want our lives to be happy, happiness is never obtained by grasping at it directly. It's that elusive thing that as soon as you go for it directly, you never get it. You can only get happiness when you're going at it from the side, and usually that path goes through some sort of suffering. If you're only going for happiness directly, okay, I have that happiness, then we're being like the lotus eaters, or we're being like the customers in an opium den, people who just like, oh, happiness, but that's not actually a meaningful life. And most of us actually want a meaningful life, not happiness directly plugged into us. If we're going to have a meaningful life, we have to strive for it, we have to work for it, and we have to suffer for it. And that's what we struggle for, so that way we can find our lives more meaningful. Now, for many people, being a parent is one of the most meaningful human experiences. And I'm not saying it's the only meaningful human experience or the most important meaningful experience. It's that a lot of people find parenting meaningful. And so I'm just using that as an example because it's pretty common. But at the same time, we have to admit that parenting, while meaningful, does not lack in suffering. I mean, first there's the pregnancy, and then there's the birth, and then there's teenagers. Go straight to the teenagers. And then there's letting the kids go, and they're no longer the same people, and you never see them again. And all of that is difficult, okay? At least some of it is heartbreaking, and some of it is extraordinarily painful. But it might be argued that the suffering of parenthood cannot be separated from the meaning that is obtained. In other words, part of the meaning is intrinsic in the suffering. It is as if the suffering that we went through in order to be a parent, in order to accomplish parenting, is part of the importance of it. It's as if well, I suffered a lot for this, and so this is part of what makes it important to me. This is part of what made my life meaningful because I struggled for this. And even so, the joy of participating in a sport cannot be separated from the hard work and pain that comes from learning and maintaining one's skills in that sport. So Paul says something interesting in Romans chapter 5. And he gets from the principles of Jesus. He says that we should take joy in our sufferings, which is actually, Jesus said we should take joy in our sufferings, but Paul goes in a different direction. Paul says, because if we didn't have sufferings, then we would never learn discipline. And if we didn't have discipline, we wouldn't ever develop good character. And if we didn't have good character, then we would never have a meaningful future. And so when we look past all the current, if we look at the current difficulties in our lives, then we could see that the world will be new because the difficulties that are going to bring new meaning to our lives, they're going to help us to be a whole human being. I just want to say one other thing about the Ecclesiastes passage that Jerry read. So Cloth, the preacher in Ecclesiastes, what he's doing in this part of Ecclesiastes is he's actually making a list of things that don't give meaning, a list of things that are, he says, meaningless, that don't offer importance to a human life, that nobody considers really significant. And so in this case, he's talking about happiness. It's interesting that in this passage, he links in both happiness and work, as if with the idea in mind that the work that he's doing is work toward his happiness. So he planted a vineyard in order that he might make wine, so that way he could get drunk. So the whole thing is the process of happiness. And he's saying that the whole process of happiness, while it is not a bad thing in and of itself, in another place he says, go ahead, be happy and drink and eat good food and things like that. He's saying that while there's nothing wrong with being happy, that's not what makes our lives significant. If our whole lives are all wrapped up in obtaining happiness and obtaining pleasure and reducing pain or reducing suffering, then our lives actually do not have meaning. That's one of many things that he lists that don't equate actual meaning in our lives. So with all that, you say, okay, Steve, well then you tell us, what does bring meaning to our lives? And we will talk about that another time, but not this time, because we're going to run out of time if we do that. Okay, so, and everyone's like, oh, you're so cruel. Cliffhanger. All right, so a few announcements that I wanted to make. All right, so first of all, I want to say that next Sunday, our community church, we're going to have a potluck. No, we're not coming here and having a potluck. We're not going to go to church and have a potluck. We're going to have a potluck, and we're each going to have it at home, and then we're going to share what we're having over the internet, over Zoom. Now, Heather's in charge of the Zoom thing, and hopefully all of you have already received an email. And so at 12 o'clock next Sunday, at 12 o'clock next Sunday, there's a link that we can get on, and we can just get on it in our regular computer, get on the link, and that will hook us into Zoom, and Heather will be in charge of setting that up. Hook us into Zoom, and then we have our things to show everybody, and we'll explain about the food and talk to each other and find out how everyone's doing. I don't think we're going to eat in front of each other, because there's just a limit to how weird this is going to be. But I think this is going to be a fun thing, and we can share food, kind of, and it's kind of a potluck, a virtual potluck, I guess. But this will be fun. It'll be fun. Come join us. I hope you'll be there. I will be there. Diane will be there, and who knows what? And so we'll see what happens. So this last week, this last week, Laundry Unicorns has agreed. There's 2 camps that the city set up, which are basically tents on platforms, and homeless folks are moving in there. Laundry Unicorns is going to be doing laundry for them, so one camp one week and one camp the other week. So we'll be doing that. Just wanted to let you know that that is going on. And as I mentioned before in the sermon, that we do have a new doctor among us, is Dr. Heather Croft. She went and defended her dissertation in front of a group of very important people, and they were very impressed by her dissertation, and they all called her doctor at the end. So she is now officially a doctor, so we all have to. So Diane and I were thinking that we should call her Dr. K. What do you think? Is that good? Okay. I don't know. Hopefully that'll be good. And then there are some other announcements. Mennonite World Conference has a new publication. There's an information from Everence in the bulletin, and other things as well. My brother's doing fine. Heather's family seems to be doing a lot better. My aunt, who has cancer, just started chemotherapy, and she's doing pretty well with that. And so, just thought I'd give an update of that. We want to remember, especially those on the border who are being attacked by COVID right now, just the same as the rest of us, but they don't have the resources, the hospitals, or the opportunities to get, and they're still waiting to get in the country, but the border is completely shut down. And so we want to remember those folks all along our southern border. And also we want to remember of the many nations of Africa. They're estimating that there could be as many as 300,000 people who pass away just from COVID in Africa, unless things change from where they're at right now. And I also just read an article today about in India. Now in India, they did a complete lockdown, so nobody is supposed to be outside. The problem is that when they did a complete lockdown, a lot of people were in places far away from their homes doing jobs. Well, they didn't have a job, and they didn't have any means to eat. So a lot of people, possibly millions of people, started walking back to villages where where many of them were arrested, and many of them were confronted and harassed by the police because they were outside, and they weren't supposed to be outside, but they were just trying to get home so that way they could be with family. Anyway, so that's a difficult situation. Anyway, so let's remember these people all over the world, because even COVID is striking a lot of us, but it's striking some places a lot harder than it is us. So let's go ahead and do a period of time of just meditation and offering mercy to different people in the world. We offer thanks for the people who are healed, for the hundreds of thousands of people who are doing better after treatment and after rest from COVID. We ask for mercy for those in the nations of Africa, for those who are targeted and threatened. And we ask that you would give them peace. We seek mercy for the many people on the southern border of the United States who seek to come in and who are now threatened with COVID without any resources or help. We seek mercy for the people in India who are trying to get home, And we seek mercy on us all in our congregation. Amen.
We will now say the benediction. May the grace of Christ that daily renews our lives, and the love of God that enables us to love all persons, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit that unites us as one body, even when we are far from each other. May they keen us to discern and prompt to obey, to complete love of God, until we meet again through Jesus Christ our Lord.